Good evening, dear listeners. I am Lady Novelist, and I welcome you to my world of captivating short stories. If you enjoy tales filled with mystery, emotion, and unexpected twists, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more enchanting stories. And now, prepare to step into a world where misunderstandings spark unforgettable tales. In this compilation, you'll meet an old lady wrongly accused of witchcraft, a young man who becomes the talk of the town as a suspected vampire, and a brave little boy whose scars hide a deeper story. These 3 short stories weave intrigue, heart, and a touch of mystery to keep you on the edge of your seat. Are you ready to uncover the truth behind these mistaken identities? Let the stories begin. Elaine Jefferson had lived in the crooked stone cottage on the hill since her husband passed, a reclusive widow and silent presence that the village preferred to keep at a distance. Her cottage was weather-beaten and ancient, surrounded by a tangle of overgrown brambles and vines that seemed to protect it like a natural fortress. Though Elaine was neither witch nor healer, the townsfolk had let superstitions take root, fed by her unusual looks, bent frame, clawed hands, eyes that shone like flints in a fire. With nothing left to anchor her to the town below, Elaine had little reason to mingle with its people. She lived quietly, accepting their judgment as a strange, twisted form of peace. Children, when daring each other, would rush up the path to her house, only to flee back to their parents, breathless with imagined terror. "She's a witch," they'd whisper, caught up in tales spun by parents who'd grown up believing the same thing. She didn't mind. It was better to be left alone than harassed. And though the tales painted her as a dangerous creature, she was content to let them linger. One late autumn afternoon, the village children were playing in the woods that stretched near the base of Elaine's hill. 7-year-old Cindy, a curious and fearless girl with tousled curls, was playing hide-and-seek with her friends. As she ducked under branches and skipped over roots, she hardly noticed the deepening gray of the sky or the shivering wind that slipped through the trees, whispering of rain. When the storm hit, it came without warning. A sharp, icy rain whipped through the woods, and the winds were strong enough to shake branches loose. Cindy's friends scattered in a rush, crying out to each other as they ran back toward the village, but Cindy, lost in the thick of the trees, went in the wrong direction. As she stumbled blindly through the underbrush, she slipped on wet leaves and tumbled down a steep embankment, her foot catching on a gnarled root. She felt a sharp, blinding pain shoot through her leg and screamed. She lay on the ground, rain drumming down on her as the sky roared and flashed with lightning. She tried to crawl, but her leg refused to move, agony shooting through her every time she tried. Terrified, Cindy cried out for her parents, for her friends, but only the storm answered back. It was nearly dark when Elaine heard the cries. Reluctantly, she picked up her lantern and made her way down the hill, following the faint, weakening voice. It didn't take her long to find Cindy, shivering and drenched, her ankle twisted at an unnatural angle. The girl looked up at Elaine in horror as she approached, the pale eyes and crooked smile confirming every fear that had been instilled in her young mind. But Elaine had never been a cruel woman, despite her solitude. She crouched down beside Cindy, her voice a soft, raspy murmur. "Don't be afraid. I won't harm you, child. We need to get you out of this rain." Cindy, still trembling, nodded, unable to argue as the pain in her leg overpowered her fright. Elaine lifted her as gently as she could, feeling the girl's small body stiffen, and carried her up the muddy slope to her cottage on the hill. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the earthy smell of dried herbs and wood smoke. Elaine laid Cindy on a rough but clean cot by the hearth, covered her with a thick woolen blanket, and began inspecting the injury. The girl winced, clutching the blanket, as Elaine spoke in gentle tones, explaining that her leg was badly sprained but not broken. "This will hurt, but it'll help," Elaine murmured as she prepared a poultice. She crushed herbs with a practiced hand, spreading the mixture over Cindy's swollen ankle. It burned at first, but soon Cindy felt a strange coolness as the pain dulled. Elaine bandaged the ankle carefully and placed a steaming mug of herbal tea beside the bed. "Drink, it'll calm you," she said, a faint smile flickering over her lips. Hours passed and the storm died down, though the wind still howled in the trees outside. Elaine sat beside Cindy, her wrinkled hands knitting, while the girl drifted in and out of sleep. She had never imagined this old woman as anything but a monstrous figure. Now she saw her as an ordinary person, just weathered by age, her movements slow but tender. Eventually, after a long silence, Cindy whispered, "Thank you." Elaine nodded, her eyes distant. "I've had my share of injuries, child. Living alone, you learn to mend yourself." In the early hours of dawn, the girl's parents came searching, desperate and frantic, led by a group of villagers holding torches and weapons as though hunting a beast. When they reached the cottage, the crowd stopped in its tracks, fearful to cross Elaine's doorstep. Cindy's father, George, pushed his way to the front, his voice loud and full of accusation. "What have you done with our daughter, witch?" he demanded. Elaine opened the door, her face shadowed by the faint light of dawn behind her. She did not flinch at the accusation. Instead, she stepped aside, allowing them to see the child resting peacefully in her cot. Cindy's mother, Betty, rushed inside, gathering her daughter in her arms with tears streaming down her face. But George still eyed Elaine with suspicion, his jaw tight. "What spell did you put on her?" he demanded. Elaine's voice was calm, though a hint of sadness edged it. "No spells here, George, just herbs and care. The girl was injured. I did what anyone would." One of the older villagers, a man named Tom, looked around the cottage, frowning as if trying to spot any hint of dark magic. But he saw only the simple tools of a healer: dried herbs, clay pots, neatly arranged bandages. He cleared his throat, catching George's arm. "George," he said quietly, "seems like she saved the girl." George's face softened slightly as he took in the room, then his gaze turned to Elaine. For the first time he noticed how frail she looked, how her shoulders sagged under the weight of loneliness. As the villagers whispered among themselves, Elaine simply watched, waiting for them to leave. Finally, Cindy's mother turned to her, her voice shaky. "Thank you for what you did. We would have lost her without you." Elaine offered only a nod. "Go on now. The girl needs rest." The villagers left the cottage, their heads lowered in shame or unease, unwilling to look Elaine in the eye. As they made their way back down the hill, they whispered to each other, the old tales of witches and curses beginning to unravel in the light of morning. A week passed before Cindy's family sent word up the hill, asking if Elaine would come down to the village. They had gathered by the well, the entire town waiting in quiet anticipation, though Elaine knew they still carried traces of fear. George was the first to speak. "We were wrong, Elaine. About you." He looked down, the weight of guilt clear in his voice. "You saved our girl. We should have known better than to believe tales spun out of fear." Elaine studied their faces, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin and the faint hum of voices she'd missed for so long. "Fear is a strong thing," she said, voice as steady as a stone. "It can make good people do foolish things." Betty stepped forward, her hand outstretched. You've been a neighbor to us all these years, and we've treated you as anything but. We want to make it right." Elaine glanced at their open faces. For the first time in years, she felt something shift within her, a thaw after a long winter. She took Betty's hand, shaking it briefly, her smile faint but genuine. The children who had huddled behind their parents peeked out, watching with wide eyes. Cindy, her ankle still wrapped but healing, took a bold step forward, her young voice breaking the silence. "Thank you, Miss Elaine," she said, her voice strong, "for taking care of me. I was scared, but you helped me." Elaine's heart softened at the girl's words. "You're a brave child, Cindy, braver than most." After that day, the village's tales of witches and curses faded into memory. Elaine no longer lived as a feared recluse, but as a respected healer. Though she still preferred her solitude on the hill, the villagers found themselves seeking her advice, her remedies, her steady hands in times of need, and over the years the children came to know her not as a witch, but as old Miss Elaine. And they all carried a lesson, taught by an unlikely friendship, that stories, especially those born of fear, were seldom true, and that truth was found only by facing one's fears with open eyes and an open heart. The village of Rio del Vad nestled deep in the shadows of the pine-laden hills. Snow blanketed its rooftops in winter, and the frosty air carried whispers of old superstitions. For decades the villagers had feared the one who lived at the edge of the woods, Joe, a young man who stayed apart from society. Some whispered he was a vampire. Others murmured of unproven murders. Children ran past his house in daylight, daring each other to knock on his door. None did. Joe rarely ventured into town except for necessities, and even then his silence and striking appearance, pale skin, black hair, piercing blue eyes, fueled the rumors. He didn't care. Joe found peace in solitude, in the company of the forest and its creatures. He wasn't the monster they believed him to be, but convincing them otherwise wasn't worth the effort. On the morning of December 14th, Anna tightened her scarf against the cold as she set out from her small cottage. Her 5-year-old son, Thomas, peeked from behind the curtains, waving excitedly. She waved back before stepping onto the snow-laden path leading into the forest. Life hadn't been easy since her husband's untimely death 2 years ago. Christmas was Thomas's favorite time of year, and though money was tight, Anna was determined to make it special. A real tree, she decided, would brighten their modest home. She gripped the rusty axe her late husband had once used, her breath fogging in the crisp air. Anna was a force to be reckoned with. Life has thrown her its harshest challenges, but she had met each one with resilience that borders on ferocity. At 29, she carried herself with a quiet strength that commanded respect. Her sharp green eyes were alive with determination, framed by dark lashes that belied the exhaustion she rarely let show. A cascade of chestnut-brown hair, often hastily tied back, escaped in wild wisps around her face, giving her a raw, untamed beauty. Her cheeks were lightly freckled, remnants of a youth spent in the sun. Anna wandered deeper into the woods, searching for the perfect tree. The towering pines were magnificent but too large. Then she spotted it, a petite evergreen standing proudly amid its larger kin. She raised her axe, ready to fell it, when a rustling in the underbrush made her freeze. Turning slowly, she spotted the source of the noise, a wild boar sow, her 7 piglets trailing behind her. The sow's sharp tusks glinted in the weak sunlight, and her eyes locked on Anna. Boars were unpredictable and fiercely protective of their young. Anna backed away slowly, her heart racing. The sow grunted, stepping closer. Anna turned and fled, plunging deeper into the woods. She didn't stop until the sounds of the boar and her brood faded into silence. Breathing heavily, she realized she had lost her bearings. The tall pines stretched endlessly in all directions. Her footsteps, half covered by new-fallen snow, betrayed no clear path back. Panic prickled her chest. The sun sank below the horizon and a heavy darkness enveloped the forest. Anna's fingers and toes turned with cold, her energy waning as she stumbled over uneven ground. Then she tripped over the thick root of an old tree, falling hard. Her head struck a rock and her world went black. When Anna awoke, she was lying on a rough-hewn cot in a dimly lit room. Her head throbbed and the scent of pine and wood smoke filled the air. Blinking, she turned her head to see a man sitting in a chair by the fire. He was tall and lean, his dark hair disheveled. His pale face caught the firelight, and his blue eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're awake," he said quietly, rising to approach her. "You hit your head. I found you in the woods." Anna tried to sit up but winced. "My head." Joe placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly warm. "You need to rest. I've bandaged it, but you'll be dizzy for a while." "Who are you?" she asked, though something in her memory stirred, a fleeting glance of his face from the village square. "Joe," he said simply. Realization dawned, and fear twisted her gut. "You're the one everyone's afraid of?" He smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. I live alone, but I'm not the monster they say I am." Anna said nothing, unsure whether to believe him, yet there was no malice in his eyes, only wariness. Joe's care was meticulous. He brought her a bowl of warm broth and sat nearby as she ate. They spoke little at first, but Anna couldn't ignore the kindness in his actions. When she tried to thank him, he dismissed it. "I couldn't leave you out there. The cold would have killed you." As dawn approached, Joe offered to escort her home. Though her head still ached, Anna was determined to return to Thomas. She followed Joe through the snow-covered forest, his steady presence reassuring. The path he took was unfamiliar to her, but he seemed to know it well. They arrived at her cottage just as Thomas ran out to greet her, his face lighting up with joy. "Mama, you're back!" Anna hugged her son tightly, tears of relief streaming down her face. Joe stood at a respectful distance, watching silently. "Thank you," Anna said softly, her gratitude genuine. Joe nodded, his expression unreadable, before turning to leave. Days passed, but Anna couldn't shake thoughts of Joe. Despite the rumors, she had seen a side of him that didn't fit the village's fearful tales. When she spotted him in the woods a week later, gathering firewood, she mustered the courage to approach him. "Joe!" she called. He looked up, surprised but not unkind. "Anna, I wanted to thank you again," she said. "And to ask, would you like to come by for Christmas dinner? It's just me and my son, but we'd love to have you." Joe hesitated, his guarded expression softening at her earnestness. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "I think it is," she said firmly. "You deserve to be around people who see you for who you are, not who they think you are." Joe studied her for a moment before nodding. "All right, I'll come." Christmas Day dawned bright and clear. Joe arrived at Anna's cottage with a simple gift for Thomas, a carved wooden figurine of a deer. Thomas was delighted, and Anna beamed, grateful for the effort Joe had made. Over dinner, laughter filled the small home as stories and smiles were shared. Joe was reserved but warm, and Anna found herself drawn to the quiet strength in his demeanor. The fear she once felt was replaced by admiration, and perhaps something more. As the evening ended, Joe prepared to leave, but Anna stopped him at the door. "Joe, thank you for being here, for everything." He met her gaze, and for the first time a genuine smile crossed his face. "Thank you, Anna, for seeing me." In the months that followed, Anna and Joe grew closer. The villagers noticed their companionship and whispered, but Anna no longer cared. Slowly, the man once shunned as a monster began to reveal his true nature, a kind, lonely soul who had finally found a place where he belonged. In the snowy heart of Rio del Vad, amidst whispers and superstitions, two lives intertwined to forge a bond that dispelled fear and warmed the coldest of winters. On the edge of a small village, perched atop a lonely hill, stood an old creaking house that had seen better days. Its paint was peeling, its windows fogged with age, and the wild vines that clung to its walls whispered secrets to the wind. This was the home of 12-year-old Sam, a boy whose life was woven with shadows. His face and body bore the scars of a fire that had engulfed him when he was just 5, leaving him with deep burns and a body that moved with a painful limp. His grandmother Erica was his only companion, a fierce protector who often reminded him that beauty was not defined by appearances. The village kids had always kept their distance, whispering tales of a haunted house and the monster that lived within. They teased, laughed, and pointed, convinced that the boy in the house was as terrifying as the stories suggested. With every jeer and every snicker, Sam felt the walls of his world grow tighter. School had become unbearable, and after a few months of enduring the laughter and rejection, he decided to stay home, hidden away with his books and the memories of a life before the fire. On Halloween, the village was alive with laughter and excitement. Children donned costumes of all shapes and sizes, their faces painted like ghouls, witches, and superheroes. As the sun dipped low, casting an orange glow over the hills, a group of particularly mischievous boys gathered near the base of Sam's hill. They were armed with plans to scare him, to prove to themselves that they could conquer the fears they had been fed for years. "Let's go to the haunted house," one of them shouted, bravado fueling his voice. "But what if he sees us?" Another hesitated, glancing up the hill where the darkened windows seemed to stare back. "Nah, he's probably hiding. Just a freak, come on." They all laughed, egging each other as they trudged up the rocky path. As they reached the top, Sam sat in his room reading a book about knights and dragons, a world far removed from his own. He didn't hear the boys approaching until their laughter broke the stillness of his home. He looked up, his heart racing, wondering if they would dare to come any closer. Suddenly one of the boys shouted, "Hey, monster, we brought you a treat," and tossed a rotten pumpkin over the fence. Sam's heart sank. He recognized the tones. He had heard them before. He wanted to ignore them, to hide away beneath his blankets, but something within him flickered, a longing for connection, for friendship, despite the pain of rejection. Gathering his courage, he opened his window slightly, enough to let out a whisper, "Leave me alone." Just then a commotion erupted as one of the boys, Jake, stumbled and lost his balance. In an instant he was tumbling toward the ancient well that stood at the edge of Sam's yard, hidden by overgrown weeds and shadows. The laughter turned to screams as Jake fell, splashing into the murky water below. "Jake!" the boys shouted, panic erupting in their voices as they rushed to the edge of the well. They peered down, horrified to see their friend struggling against the water, his cries echoing upward. In that moment, all thoughts of revenge vanished, replaced by a primal fear. The boys turned and fled down the hill, leaving Jake behind. Sam's heart raced as he heard the commotion. He had spent so long in isolation that the sound of anyone in distress stirred something deep within him. He couldn't just stand by. He grabbed a sturdy rope that his grandmother had kept for repairs, his hands trembling not from fear but from determination. He rushed to the well, peering over the edge. "Jake," he called, trying to keep his voice steady. "Hold on, I'm coming." Jake's head bobbed just above the surface, panic-stricken eyes searching the darkness above. "Help! Get me out of here!" Taking a deep breath, Sam secured the rope around a sturdy post near the well, his heart thudding in his chest. "I'm going to throw this down. Grab it." He flung the rope down, watching as it landed just out of Jake's reach. "You have to swim over to it." With sheer desperation, Jake managed to paddle toward the rope, clenching it tightly when he finally reached it. Sam's hands shook as he pulled, feeling the strain of his small body against the weight of Jake. "Hold on, I won't let you go." With every ounce of strength, Sam pulled until he felt the weight shift, and finally Jake emerged, drenched and gasping, clinging to the rope. With one final heave, Sam pulled him to safety, and Jake tumbled onto the ground, coughing and sputtering. The moment they were free from the well, a heavy silence settled. Sam looked at Jake, whose face was streaked with mud and fear. The other boys stood at a distance, their faces pale with shock. Sam could hear their whispers, unsure of what to say or do. Why did you help me?" Jake asked, his voice shaky as he pushed himself up. "Because it's the right thing to do," Sam replied, surprising even himself with the steadiness of his voice. "You were in trouble." The boys now huddled together, watching with wide eyes. Sam's heart pounded, knowing that their perceptions of him were shifting in real time. It was a moment he had never anticipated, a bridge forming between his world and theirs. "I'm sorry for what we did," Jake stammered, his voice thick with embarrassment. "I didn't mean to. I was just trying to be brave." "Brave isn't about scaring people," Sam said softly, his gaze steady. "It's about helping others, even if they look different." The other boys exchanged glances, the fear that had once kept them at bay now replaced by a strange sense of kinship. They approached cautiously, Jake leading the way. Can we be friends?" Sam's heart fluttered at the possibility. "You mean it?" "Yeah," Jake said, his eyes earnest. "You saved my life. I was wrong to judge you." The silence that hung in the air felt transformative. Sam took a tentative step forward, and the other boys joined him, their apprehension melting away. They began to talk, sharing stories and laughter, finding common ground beyond their differences. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the hill, Sam realized that he had not only rescued Jake, but had also freed himself from the chains of solitude. The laughter of children filled the air, echoing against the haunted walls of his home, transforming the darkness into light. From that day forward, the village began to see Sam differently. No longer just a boy with the scars, he became a friend. A reminder that true beauty resides in kindness, courage, and the connections we forge with one another. The stories of the haunted house faded, replaced by tales of friendship and bravery. And as Sam looked out from his hill, he understood that sometimes it takes a leap into the unknown to discover the light within.